The wind was sharp that evening in Dallas, Texas, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. I sat on the porch of the house my son Daniel had built with his own hands. My heart was heavy, my eyes swollen from days of crying. Daniel was gone, just like that. A car accident had stolen him from me, and with his death it felt like my entire world had collapsed. But even in my grief, I had one small comfort: being inside his home, surrounded by the life he had built. Every photo on the walls, every tool in the garage, every piece of furniture carried his fingerprints. This was where I felt closest to him. I believed his wife, my daughter-in-law Megan, would need me now more than ever. We could grieve together. We could hold on to each other, like family should. But I was wrong. Megan had changed almost overnight. The woman who once hugged me tightly at Christmas dinners now looked at me as though I was a burden. She avoided me in the kitchen, her phone glued to her hand. When she spoke, her words were clipped, impatient. And that night, 3 days after we buried Daniel, she finally let the venom spill. "You can't stay here anymore, Linda," she said coldly, standing in the living room with her arms folded. I blinked, confused. What do you mean? This is Daniel's home. My son's home. He wanted me here." Her lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "Daniel is gone, and I need my space. You're not part of this life anymore. Pack your things and leave." The words hit me harder than the funeral sermon had. My chest tightened. "Megan, I just lost my son. I have nowhere else to go. Please, at least let me stay until No." Her voice was sharp, final. "I want a fresh start. Without you." I stared at her, searching for some sign of compassion, some glimmer of the woman my son had loved. But all I saw was coldness. Her eyes, once soft, now gleamed with something else, something that made my stomach twist. I left that night with nothing but a suitcase and Daniel's old watch clutched in my hand. As I walked down the driveway, I looked back one last time at the house where I had shared so many meals, so much laughter, and so much love. The lights inside were already dimming. Megan didn't even watch me go. For the first time in my life, I felt truly abandoned. The following weeks were a blur. I stayed in a small motel on the edge of town, surviving on cheap coffee and the kindness of strangers who didn't know my story. Every day I woke up with the same ache in my chest, the loss of Daniel and the sting of Megan's betrayal. But grief soon gave way to suspicion. Something about Megan's behavior didn't sit right with me. She had moved on far too quickly. Barely a week after Daniel's death, I saw a strange car parked outside the house late at night. Through the motel window, I watched, my heart sinking, as a tall man stepped out and entered the home that should have still been filled with mourning. I clenched my fists. My son's body was barely in the ground, and Megan was entertaining another man? I wanted to scream, to storm over there and demand answers. But something inside me told me to wait, to watch. And then came the letter. It arrived in a cream envelope, stamped with the seal of Daniel's lawyer. My hands trembled as I opened it, my eyes scanning the neatly typed words. It was an invitation to the reading of Daniel's will. The date was set for 2 weeks after his death. The location, the lawyer's office downtown. My heart pounded as I held the letter. Daniel had never spoken much about his will, but I knew one thing. My son was thoughtful. He wouldn't have left me with nothing. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Megan thought she had won. Maybe she thought she had pushed me out for good. But the will would tell the truth. And deep down, I prayed it would give me more than just comfort. I prayed it would give me justice. Because if Megan thought she could erase me from Daniel's life, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The day of the will reading arrived with a thick layer of clouds hanging low over Dallas, as if the sky itself mourned Daniel. I dressed in my best black dress, the one Daniel always said made me look strong, and walked into the law office with my heart pounding. The waiting room smelled faintly of leather and ink. Megan was already there, sitting with her legs crossed, wearing a sleek navy blue dress and expensive heels. Her hair was styled perfectly and her makeup flawless, too flawless for a grieving widow. She looked more like she was attending a business meeting than the reading of her late husband's will. "Linda," she said flatly, giving me a once-over. "Didn't expect to see you here." I lifted my chin. "Daniel was my son. Of course I'm here." Her lips curved into a smirk. "Don't get your hopes up." Before I could answer, the lawyer, Mr. Harris, stepped into the room. He was a tall, gray-haired man with a kind face, but today his expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Miller," he greeted us, using my married name and Megan's. "Please, follow me." We entered his office and sat across from him at a large mahogany desk. He shuffled a few papers before clearing his throat. "As you know, your late husband and son, Daniel Miller, left behind a will. Today, we will review his final wishes." I folded my hands tightly in my lap, bracing myself. Mr. Harris began reading. "To my beloved wife, Megan, I leave my personal vehicle and a financial sum of $50,000. Megan's eyes lit up. She leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile, glancing at me as if to say, "See? He chose me." But Mr. Harris continued. "To my mother, Linda Thompson, I leave the house, the land it sits on, and the remainder of my estate, including all savings, investments, and assets." The room went silent. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment I wasn't sure I had heard correctly. "What?" Megan's voice cracked, sharp with disbelief. "That's not possible. The house is mine. I live there." "You must be mistaken." Mr. Harris shook his head calmly. Daniel was very clear in his wishes. He stated that, in the event of his death, his mother should inherit the home and the majority of his estate. He explained that his mother had been his greatest supporter and protector all his life, and he wanted to ensure she was cared for. Tears stung my eyes. My sweet Daniel. Even in death he had thought of me. Megan slammed her hand on the desk. "This is ridiculous." "I'm his wife. I should be the one inheriting everything. He loved me." Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. "I understand this is difficult, Mrs. Miller, but the will is legally binding. Daniel left you a generous sum, but the estate belongs to Linda." Megan's face twisted with rage. "This is unfair. He didn't mean it. He must have been coerced. Or confused." Her voice cracked, growing more desperate with each word. I finally spoke, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. He trusted me. And he was right." Megan's eyes snapped to mine, blazing with fury. "You did this. You turned him against me." I leaned forward, my own voice low and sharp. "I didn't have to. You did that all by yourself." For the first time since Daniel's death, I saw Megan's mask slip. The polished, perfect exterior shattered, and underneath was pure venom. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this, Linda." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The office fell silent again. Mr. Harris sighed. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this must be overwhelming. Do you want me to arrange for the transfer of ownership immediately?" I nodded slowly, still dazed. "Yes, please." As I left the office, the weight of Daniel's gift pressed against my heart. The house, the land, the savings, everything was now mine. But it wasn't about the money. It was about what it represented. Proof that Daniel had seen Megan for who she truly was. Proof that he had trusted me to carry on his legacy. But I also knew something else. Megan wasn't going to accept this quietly. She had already shown me what she was capable of, and now that I had everything she wanted, I knew she would come for me. As I stepped out into the gray, stormy sky, I made a silent promise to myself and to Daniel. If Megan wants a war, she's going to get one. The following week felt like a storm brewing over my life. I returned to Daniel's house, the house Megan had forced me out of, with Mr. Harris's documents in hand, legally proving I was now the rightful owner. Walking up that familiar driveway, I felt both triumph and sorrow. Daniel wasn't here to greet me, but I could almost hear his voice urging me to stay strong. As I pushed the front door open, the scent of Megan's perfume still lingered in the halls. Her shoes were lined neatly by the door. Her clothes hung in the closet. She hadn't moved out yet, despite the will being read. And she wasn't about to go quietly. I found her in the living room, sipping a glass of wine like nothing had changed. She looked up at me, her eyes flashing with hatred. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "This is my home now," I said firmly, holding up the legal papers. "Daniel left it to me. You need to pack your things and leave." She laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made my skin crawl. "You really think a few papers will keep me out?" "Daniel loved me. This house is mine, no matter what those documents say." "You can't erase me." My heart thudded in my chest, but I kept my composure. "Daniel trusted me to protect what he built. You'll respect that. If you don't leave, I'll have the sheriff escort you out." Her smile twisted. "Go ahead. But don't think for 1 second I'm going to let you live here in peace. You're an old woman, Linda. Alone. Vulnerable. And I'm not going anywhere until I get what's mine." She slammed her glass down on the table, the stem shattering, and stormed upstairs. Moments later, I heard the slam of a bedroom door. I stood frozen, my hand trembling around Daniel's papers. She wasn't bluffing. Megan wasn't going to walk away quietly. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards set my nerves on edge. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty. By morning, Megan was gone. But her absence didn't bring relief. It brought dread. The first sign of her schemes came 2 days later. I was standing on the porch trimming Daniel's rose bushes when a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a man in an expensive suit holding a folder. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked smoothly. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I represent Mrs. Megan Miller. She's contesting the will. Claims your son was coerced into leaving the estate to you." My stomach dropped. "That's a lie," he shrugged. "Perhaps. But it's going to court, and these things can take years to resolve." He handed me a summons, then smiled politely before walking away. As I stared at the papers in my hand, rage bubbled inside me. Megan wasn't just after Daniel's money, she was trying to destroy me. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening. Late at night, I'd hear tapping on the windows. Once I found slashed tires on my car. Another time, I came home to find the back door wide open, though I knew I had locked it. I knew it was Megan. She wanted to scare me. To break me, but she underestimated me. Daniel hadn't raised me to be weak. I wasn't going to sit back while she dismantled everything he left behind. If Megan wanted a fight, I would give her one. I began documenting everything. Every threatening call, every suspicious incident, every late-night shadow. I spoke with Mr. Harris about hiring a private investigator. If Megan thought she could outsmart me, she was about to learn she wasn't the only one who could play dirty. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, I stood in the kitchen staring out the window. The house felt heavy with silence. I thought of Daniel, his laughter, his kindness, the way he always wanted fairness in everything he did. "Don't worry, son," I whispered. "I'll protect what you left me. She won't win." But deep down, I knew Megan wasn't just after the house. She wanted to break me completely, and she was willing to cross any line to get it. I didn't know how far she'd go yet, but I made a silent vow. When she struck, I would be ready. And this time, I wouldn't just defend myself. This time, I'd make her pay. The first time I realized just how dangerous Megan could be was when I found the dead roses. Daniel's roses had always been his pride and joy. He tended to them every spring, pruning with such care, whispering to them as though they were children. They were still in bloom when I moved back into the house. But one morning, I walked out to find every rose bush hacked to pieces. The stems were broken, petals scattered across the lawn like crimson blood. Pinned to the garden gate was a note, scrawled in red marker. "You don't belong here. Leave, or I'll make you." I clenched the paper so tightly it crumpled in my fist. For a moment, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. Then anger replaced it. She had crossed a line. Destroying Daniel's roses wasn't just vandalism. It was desecration. She wanted me broken. She wanted me to cry. Instead, I swore to myself that every tear she tried to bring me would come back on her tenfold. Mr. Harris arranged for a private investigator named Cole to meet me at a small diner downtown. He was in his late 40s, tall, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen more than enough lies in its time. "You're sure it's her?" Cole asked, flipping through his notepad as I explained everything that had happened. The slashed tires, the threats, the roses. "Yes," I said firmly. "Megan, she's obsessed with control. If she can't own this house, she'll burn it down before letting me have it." Cole nodded slowly. "Then it's not just about property. It's personal. That makes her dangerous. But it also makes her sloppy." I leaned in. "I don't just want her stopped. I want her exposed. I want people to see her for who she is." He smiled faintly. "That, Mrs. Thompson, I can do." For the next 2 weeks, Cole followed Megan. What he uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. She wasn't just contesting the will. She was draining Daniel's old accounts, forging signatures, pawning off his belongings. She had even tried to put the house up for sale online, pretending she was still the legal owner. But the most damning discovery came one evening when Cole followed her to a bar on the edge of town. She wasn't alone. She was with another man, laughing, touching his arm, kissing him like they'd been together for years. His name was Ryan. Young, muscular, the kind of man who looked like he thought the world owed him something. Cole snapped pictures of them together, and when he handed them to me, my chest tightened. Daniel hadn't even been in the ground 6 months, and she was already parading around with someone new. My grief twisted into fury. "You'll get your revenge," Cole said, his voice calm. "But you need patience. Let her dig her own grave. And she will." The contest over the will grew uglier. Megan's lawyer smeared my name in court filings, painting me as a manipulative old woman who had brainwashed my son. She even stood in front of a judge and pretended to cry, saying Daniel had promised her everything. But I kept my composure. I had Cole's evidence tucked away, ready to use when the time was right. Late at night, I would sit in the study where Daniel once worked, flipping through his old journals. In one entry, just months before his death, he wrote, "Megan has changed. She's not the woman I married. She's secretive, cold, and obsessed with money. Sometimes I wonder if she even loves me anymore." Reading those words broke me all over again, but it also gave me strength. Daniel had seen through her, he knew. And now it was up to me to finish what he couldn't. One evening, I heard a noise in the backyard. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and froze. A figure was crouched near the shed, fumbling with the lock. "Megan!" I shouted. The figure bolted. I caught a glimpse of her blonde hair as she sprinted toward the street and jumped into her SUV. Gravel sprayed as she sped away. The next morning, I discovered she had broken into the shed and stolen Daniel's old toolbox, his father's heirloom. Another piece of him ripped away. That was the moment I decided defense wasn't enough anymore. If she wanted war, I would give her war. I called Cole. "It's time," I said. He didn't hesitate. "Then we'll start digging deeper. If she's hiding skeletons, we'll find them." And oh, did we? The more we uncovered, the darker Megan's secrets became. Credit card fraud, gambling debts, even whispers of insurance scams. She wasn't just greedy, she was a predator, living off manipulation and lies. Every page of Cole's report felt like a weapon in my hands. And I intended to use them all. But the final blow came when Cole uncovered something that chilled me to my bones. Megan had taken out a life insurance policy on Daniel just months before his accident, and she was the sole beneficiary. My blood ran cold. The car crash that killed Daniel? Had it really been an accident? For the first time, revenge didn't just feel like justice, it felt like survival. When Cole slid the thick folder across my kitchen table, I felt like I was holding a loaded gun. Photographs, bank statements, pawn shop receipts, the life insurance document with Megan's name scrawled across the beneficiary line. It was an arsenal. Each page was a little truth that, when strung together, would become a rope to pull her down. "Be careful," Cole said quietly. "You don't want to look like you're wrecking a grieving widow. The court doesn't like vindictive people. You need to be surgical, I nodded. Surgical was right. Daniel had always admired precision. He'd tell me to use facts, not fury. So that's what I would do. Facts, paper, witnesses, a strategy that left nothing to her smooth tongue. First, we rebuilt the timeline. Cole had photos of Megan at the bar with Ryan the night before the funeral. Receipts showing she'd pawned Daniel's watch 2 days after the burial. And, most damning, a copy of an email from Megan to a broker where she discussed accelerating funds and minimizing exposure. That phrase, innocent to a non-lawyer, screamed fraud to Mr. Harris. I met with Mr. Harris in his office. He sat back, eyes on the documents. "This insurance policy is troubling," he said. "If you can show she had motive and opportunity, and if the insurance investigators find anything odd about the timing or beneficiaries, this could shift the case from a civil will dispute to criminal inquiry." He tapped his pen thoughtfully. "You must hand a copy to the prosecutor." We did. I watched the prosecutor's face go from polite to grim as he read. "We'll open an investigation," he said. "We can't make charges public yet, but we'll look into the policy, the pawn shop receipts, and the communications." That evening, I called Ryan's number, the man Megan had paraded around town. He answered on the second ring, surprised and sloppy. He had the arrogance of a man who thought no one saw him. Under the pretext of offering him a settlement for silence, I baited him into revealing details about the night Daniel died, where they'd been, who had driven whom, what Megan had said about handling things if Daniel couldn't pay. He let slip more than he intended. Words like pressure, deadline, and the offhand admission that Megan had been terrified of losing everything came out like loose coins. I recorded it, every syllable, and Cole printed the transcript. Next, I went to the press, not to smear her in a vendetta, but to shine a light where the law could act. I had friends, community leaders who respected Daniel's memory, and one small piece placed strategically in the local paper set a ripple into motion. The headline wasn't sensationalist, it was factual. Investigation opened into Miller Estate. Readers asked questions. Neighbors came forward. More receipts surfaced, anonymously slipped into Cole's mailbox. People who'd been quietly suspicious finally had the courage to speak. Megan felt the pressure like heat. I watched as her confident facade began to crumble. Her supermarket runs became furtive. Her social media feed went suddenly silent. People who'd once complimented her now exchanged looks at the farmer's market. Word travels fast in small towns. Reputations are fragile as glass. Then came the confrontation I'd been planning. I arranged for a deposition to be taken, Megan under oath, answering questions about transfers, the insurance policy, her relationship with Ryan, and the forged signatures Cole had found. I sat in the back of the attorney's conference room and watched her. She tried to hold on to poise, but the small lies she'd told for months began to snag like loose threads on a sweater. "Mrs. Miller," the investigator asked, "when did you first become beneficiary on Mr. Miller's life insurance policy?" She swallowed. "A few months ago," she said. "Daniel and we discussed our finances. Can you explain why he would add you mere weeks before his accident?" Her face paled. "We were planning our future." The investigator slid a check across the table that bore Daniel's signature, except the signature didn't match the samples. Forensic handwriting analysts eventually confirmed it wasn't his. Megan's defenses buckled. On the recording, someone's voice, later revealed to belong to a clerk at the brokerage, admitted Megan had pressured them to hurry paperwork. By then, the prosecutors had enough to subpoena bank records and call witnesses. Megan's lawyer fought viciously, trying to spin everything as grief-driven rumor. But the paper trail is a dogged thing. With each subpoena return, a new piece of evidence thudded onto the table. On a rainy Thursday, the phone in my kitchen rang, and I knew before the first word what it would be. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Alvarez." He read me the line slowly, as if unwilling to make the news sound more cheerful than it was. "We've obtained enough probable cause. We have an arrest warrant for Megan Miller for fraud and coercion. We'll need you to come down for a statement." My knees trembled so badly I sat down. Justice had teeth. It bit. The arrest made quieter headlines than I'd hoped. Prosecutors still moved carefully, mindful of trial procedure. But within days, Megan was taken into custody in the early morning, a chaotic scene captured by neighbors. Handcuffs, shouted orders, the whir of a police SUV. She screamed, "I didn't do anything!" in a voice that had before been used to charm guests at dinner parties. Now it sounded like a child who couldn't understand why the adults weren't listening. At home, I felt relief, but not triumph. The house felt hollow in a new way. Daniel's laughter no longer echoed at all. Yet as I sat with Cole and Mr. Harris and read through the stacks of filings and evidence, I felt an understandable peace. The law would act, and the town would know. The story had spun from gossip to proof. But revenge, I'd learned, isn't the same as justice. Revenge could be cruel and endless. Justice, when it worked, felt cleaner. I had wanted Megan exposed, and exposed she now was, naked before the world's court of facts. That night, as rain streaked the windows and the roses grew back from their hacked stems under my careful tending, I allowed myself to breathe. The fight had been long and dirty and far from pleasant. Yet the house had been saved from a woman who'd sought to burn it for $1. There was one more step to take: the courtroom. The trial would be public, messy, and the hardest part of the journey. But it would also be where the final stories were told on the record, where Daniel's voice might be heard again through the details, and where Megan would either face the consequences or find a way to slither back into life. I placed a hand on the papers, the receipts, the emails, the life insurance policy. My fingers traced Daniel's name on the will copy. I whispered to the empty room, "Be brave." "Danny, we're almost there." Outside, the town settled into sleep, and inside the house, for the first time in months, I felt something like hope threading itself through the ache. The next act would be the hardest, but I would stand in court and speak the truth. I would let the law do what it had been built to do, and when it was all over, I promised myself, Megan would remember the day she tried to kick me out, because she'd live with the consequences forever. The courthouse smelled like old coffee and polished wood, a kind of neutral scent built to swallow emotion. I walked up the marble steps with Mr. Harris at my side and Cole behind him, the folder of evidence feeling heavier than it had on my kitchen table. Inside, the city buzzed with a different kind of electricity. Reporters who had once sipped wine with Megan now angled microphones, neighbors craned their necks to catch a glimpse, and a courtroom full of people who wanted to watch a fallen facade burn. Megan entered like a queen into a ruined hall, shoulders squared, makeup immaculate, her hair arranged to mask whatever fracturing had been left inside. But the eyes gave her away. She looked exhausted in a way no amount of contouring could hide. She shot me a single glance that felt like a dare, and then sat with her lawyer, whispering in clipped bursts. Her mother sat stiffly in the third row, hands folded like a prayer she was too ashamed to voice. The prosecution began with small, precise motions, laying out the timeline, the motive, the opportunity. The first witness was Ryan, Megan's boyfriend in public and occasional accomplice in private. He took the stand with Cole's transcript in front of him and the guilty weight of truth on his shoulders. He fumbled, then confessed. He spoke of overheard conversations, of Megan's panic about losing the house, of her pushing for arrangements to be accelerated. His voice broke when he described her coldness the night of the funeral. The court heard it all. Next came the forensic analyst who specialized in handwriting. I had taped my son's old checks and letters to the wall at home for years, the loops of his J and the small slant of his T lingering like his stubbornness. Sitting under bright lights, the analyst compared signatures and told the courtroom, in a voice that folded all doubt away, that Daniel's name on the insurance documents had not been written by him. The camera flashed, and I felt something loosen inside my chest. A small, hard stone of vindication. Megan's defense tried to stitch a story of grief and confusion, that she'd influenced decisions through love and care, that Daniel had been of unsound mind in the weeks before the accident and had made poor choices. Her lawyer looked persuasive when he moved through phrases like emotional vulnerability and mistaken intent, but the paper trail disagreed. The pawnshop receipts, the transfer ledgers, Ryan's recorded admissions. They were patient, unblinking proof. Then came Richard. My husband had broken and rebuilt himself a few times since all this started. There were days I wanted to shake him and nights I wanted to clasp him to my heart. But the courtroom needed him to be honest, and he was. He took the stand with lines on his face deeper than I'd seen before and told the truth the way a man brandishes an axe in winter. Blunt. Necessary. He testified about the late-night calls, the terrified whispers when he said, "We'll figure it out." The time he'd signed something he hadn't read. His voice trembled with shame as he described how fear had led him to collude, how he had convinced himself he was protecting us. He told the court that he had encouraged Megan to stall, and stall she had, until Tyler's threats escalated, and Daniel's name had been on every fearful breath. When Richard's words ended, the room was silent, like it had been waiting for his confession to fall. He testified that he had been weak. He testified that it had nearly killed his son. It was not a theatrical repentance. It was a simple, terrible truth. He didn't ask for absolution. He asked only that we live honestly from then on. Megan's face crumpled in pieces, not for the first time when confronted with facts she could not finesse. Her lawyer tried one last time to paint her as a victim of circumstance, but the jury had been marching through the evidence for days. Small things had a way of adding up. The jewelry pawned, the borrowed checks, the text messages that suggested hurried planning. It was not theater. It was repetition. And repetition in the law becomes meaning. In the final moments of the trial, the prosecutor stood, his voice steady and grave. "This case isn't only about money," he said. "It's about a pattern of manipulation that cost a man his life and nearly cost another his conscience." He asked for justice, not vengeance, for Megan to be held accountable for fraud, for coercion, for the ways in which greed had been disguised as love. We waited. Days stretched into a tensioned string until the jury filed back in. The four-person's eyes, lined with wear, looked at the judge and then at the room. "We find the defendant guilty on counts of fraud and coercion," she said. The words landed like a verdict of weather, undeniable, unchangeable. Megan sobbed, real, ragged sounds that sounded less like repentance and more like the unspooling of a woman who had, until then, believed herself untouchable. The judge's sentence was measured, stern. It would include restitution, probation tied to community service, and in the eyes of some, the stigma of criminality would be the harsher punishment. It was not the barbaric retribution I'd fantasized about in the darker hours. It was law doing what law could do, fixing where it could, and marking wrongs where it couldn't. After the trial, the town stirred with judgment and gossip. Friends divided themselves like splintered beams. Some stayed loyal to Megan, unwilling or unable to accept someone they'd liked could do harm. Others, who had once held invitations from her, called to offer apologies and condolences to me. Richard and I talked long into the night. He asked for permission to serve out his public penance, to set right what he could, to be a different man. I told him the truth. Forgiveness would be slow, but it would be possible if he never returned to fear-fueled shortcuts. In the months that followed, there were smaller reckonings. Ryan faded from his flashy corner of town. The pawn shop returned Daniel's watch to me after being subpoenaed. It was hurt, scratched, but it was returned. Little victories. Justice had taken a long and imperfect path, but I felt, in the slow, ordinary aftermath, a clarity I hadn't dared hope for when I first left that house with only a suitcase. I did not feel triumphant. I did not clap when Megan was taken away. What I felt was steadier, a settling, as if something that had been skewed had been adjusted back into place. Daniel's name, handled tenderly by the court and the legal system, held its dignity. The house remained mine, and I set about turning it back into a home, not of marble and money, but of the small things that had kept Daniel alive in memory. His rusted tools returned to the shed. His favorite chair positioned by the window where he used to watch the rain. I used the estate as he would have wanted. I established a small scholarship fund in his name for students who wanted to study construction and community development, practical things, the kind Daniel valued. I hosted a modest memorial each year, not a spectacle, but an honest gathering of people who loved him. Those were the quiet, good uses for a fortune that had almost been sullied beyond recognition. Sometimes I walk the garden at twilight and talk to the roses about the way he used to whisper to them. I tell them what we did in court and what we did afterward. I tell them to forgive the hands that hurt them. It is a practice of mercy as much as it is of memory. As for Megan, she calls sometimes from a number I don't always answer. Sometimes I take the calls and listen to the thinness of the voice that used to order flowers and book trips. Once she said, "I'm sorry." A small phrase in a canyon of damage. I accepted it quietly, because harboring it would only consume me. The law had done its work. The rest was mine to decide. I chose to live. If there's one lesson this ordeal carved into me, it is this. Grief exposes what's hollow inside people, and grief can also forge resolve. I had been knocked to the floor by both. I chose to rise not to punish for pleasure, but to protect what was right, and to honor what had been lost. On a warm afternoon years later, a young man from the scholarship program stood on my porch, tools in hand, wide-eyed with gratitude. He hugged me like family. I looked at him and thought of Daniel, his laugh, his stubborn belief that the ordinary work of building a house could make a life. I smiled, and for the first time in a long while, the smile matched without reservation the face inside it. Revenge had been a means, but justice had become the end. And somehow, amid all the court dates and evidence and broken roses, life stitched itself back together in small, honest ways. The house remained, the tools were returned to their places, and the roses bloomed again each spring, as if to remind me that even when hands hurt, the earth forgives and grows.